Hello and welcome to the Everyday Adventure podcast. My name is Nikki Bass and I will be bringing you thoughts and ideas and hopefully some inspiration on how to build more adventure into your everyday life. Today, I am delighted to welcome Fran Turauskis to the podcast. So Fran is the host of the Seize Your Adventure podcast. And I first met Fran when she actually put a request for speakers to come on her podcast to have a chat about their experience or their knowledge of epilepsy and combined with adventure. And it really highlighted how much I really didn't know about the condition. I think quite a lot of people, my experience has been quite limited maybe to a friend or a colleague. And I spoke to Fran, I thought actually this is something I need to consider much more. And then just in thinking about how I think for a lot of us, we take for granted how our access either to outdoors or whatever challenge we want to take on is really limited by our ability to take the first step. But when you have so many more things to think about and around how, your own safety and your own ability to manage in these spaces, I think that adds so many more layers of complexity to it. So it's a real thrill to actually be able to sort of return the favour and have Fran on this show. So Fran, welcome to the podcast. I'm delighted to have you here. I suppose my first question really is, what inspired you to start the podcast, Seize Your Adventure? Where did the idea come from?
So it's a little bit of a long story. I'll try and slim it down a little bit. It's basically when I decided to walk the Camino de Santiago in 2017. I was doing that just as something for myself, as quite a lot of people do every year, going and walking 500-mile route across Spain, this nice month away from work, month away from everything, as a little bit of a career break. And you have a lot of people walking that route. But for some reason, my story when we were walking seemed to be a bit surprising to people because I was diagnosed with epilepsy in 2015. So a couple of years before I walked the Camino, I didn't really see that as being something special. By the time I walked the Camino, I was on medication and I hadn't had a seizure for 2 years. So I felt like I was perfectly safe and I just wanted to do something as a little bit of a almost celebration of being able to do something, essentially. But the people that I was walking with, they were all very interested in the condition. There were quite a lot of people that were surprised that I could do something like that by myself as well when I have a condition like epilepsy. And really walking that route made me realize how little the condition is known and how much is assumed about people that have a condition like epilepsy. So when I got back, I started writing about my experience and I started doing blogs to kind of process what I had gone through, the hike that I'd done. And I started having other people with epilepsy contacting me saying that they either were doing stuff like that and they didn't think that anybody else with epilepsy was doing it, so they were really excited, or that they had never considered they could do something like that. So because I didn't think that my story was that interesting and I didn't want to keep telling it, I decided to go out there and find other people's stories. And I thought that it was so important to do that and to tell as many people's stories as possible, because one of the things with epilepsy is that it is so different for everyone. So my epilepsy story, the kind of seizures that I have, will be very different to somebody else's epilepsy and seizures. So I thought it was really important to just try and share that in a way that is hopefully a bit more accessible, because you're talking about a condition, but you're talking mostly about the sports and the adventures and the journey. So it's kind of a nice way into showing the people behind the diagnosis, essentially.
So that's so interesting. So actually, in a way, it wasn't even your own experience of epilepsy that prompted you, but actually the questions you're receiving from other people around that sort of understanding. Actually, most people don't really know that much about it, and maybe there are a lot of preconceptions out there. Or, I mean, is that something that you've come across frequently when you've been doing the adventures that you go on, that people go, oh, well, how can you be doing this? Or you must be really brave to give this a go. There's this sort of, I'm just wondering what sort of comments you get.
Yeah, I definitely think that there are two kind of groups that people fall into, particularly within the epilepsy adventure community, rather within the adventure community. You have some people that are either slightly concerned or slightly worried for me, or slightly worried of me, that maybe they'll have to look after me and they don't quite know what to do if something were to happen. I definitely have had quite a lot of those conversations, telling people what they would have to do if something would happen, reassuring them that it's probably not going to happen, and that kind of thing. And I distinctly remember a couple of people on the Camino. There was one person who just had this absolute look of fear when I told them, and basically kind of like ran away from me. But then I managed to speak to him, and we ended up walking together for quite a few days after that. So it really got me realizing that some people are quite concerned about the condition, and being around someone with epilepsy, but just talking about it just makes such a big difference. And people just need to know a little bit more for them to be much less afraid, essentially. And that is something that I've come across quite a lot. But then there are the other group of people within the adventure community who very much just go, oh, okay, cool. Anything I need to know? And that's it. I think particularly in some sports, I think kind of like climbing and stuff like that, people are very laid back anyway. They're very aware of things that could go wrong within the sport, and they're very aware of risk assessments and stuff. So for some people, I think certainly for me, epilepsy and the potential to have a seizure is just another form of risk assessment when you're doing any sports. So yeah, there's definitely those two groups for sure.
Yeah, I'm sure that probably can, a lot of people can sort of relate to that, particularly if you take part in those sort of outdoor sports, that even if you're not leading them, often you're making those kinds of risk assessments in your own head about, is this something that I'm comfortable with? Is it not? Are there enough safety structures in place or support structures in place if something does go wrong? And I suppose if you're living with it, maybe that's something you're doing as part of your day-to-day anyway. It's just that when other people encounter it, they're just like, oh my goodness, this is so much more than I have to think about. Their anxiety about, well, what do? I find really interesting.
Yes.
When you've already been through that process, I suppose.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, you say that. I think one of the things I always think back to when I was first diagnosed was going into London a day or two after one of my seizures, and my mum just speaking to me on the phone going, don't stand near the edge of the platform, stay back from the edge of the platform. I'm like, okay, mum, yeah, got it. So, it is risk assessments everywhere, and, everyone does it every day. But with something like epilepsy, it's just another thing that you have to be aware of, essentially.
So given that, I guess, what's the biggest challenges that you face when you've taken on, whether it's the Camino or the adventures you've done since?
For me, because my seizures are controlled by my medication, aside from making sure that I'm taking my medication at the right time every day, I can forget about my epilepsy to a certain extent. But there are a couple of things that logistically I find very difficult. So the biggest thing is I don't drive. I never learned how to drive because I kept having seizures around the time that I would have been learning to drive, essentially. And even though I could drive now, I could learn to drive if I wanted to, it is definitely one of the things that I still feel a bit anxious about. So I don't know if I'll ever learn now. Hopefully in the future, maybe I'll feel more confident to do it. But because of that, I can't just hop into a car to go out and do a run or a hike somewhere or go on a wild camp. I have to think about getting the train or getting the bus and that kind of thing, begging people for lifts quite a lot. So that logistically is quite a big thing when I'm planning where I'm going, and particularly when you factor in the second thing that I find most difficult, which is not having the money. I think if you have access to the outdoors very nearby, or you have something like a car that can get you there quite quickly, you don't necessarily think about it as much. But if I'm having to get on a train or a plane to go somewhere, it suddenly becomes much more expensive. I mean, I was looking at a train ticket up to Scotland to go and do some hiking there after this is all over, and I was looking at a £300 ticket. So, it kind of like those kind of things definitely add up. And I think that's one of the things that I have found most difficult is that logistics of not being able to drive, really.
No, that is interesting. I know, and I've spoken to friends who don't drive for other reasons, and I think it becomes, I guess it's where it's things that you sort of maybe take for granted, or some of us take for granted, that okay, so if I wanted to go out, I would just jump in my car and go. And like you said, actually just that logistics of if I can't do that. But also I think your point about money is so important, because I think that's something that's just not talked about enough. It's like this assumption that actually the only barrier to getting out there and doing whatever it is your wildest dreams take you is, you know, is your own determination. And whereas actually the logistical challenges and just that, you know, well, where do I get the money from to do this? And I know for a lot of people it's actually, where do I get the money and the time, because I've got to work as well.
You have one or the other. You have the time to do something, but you're not working as much, so you don't have the money, or you're working so hard that you might have the money but no time to do
it. How have you countered that? Do you look closer to home? What are the things that you do to get around those challenges?
Yeah, definitely over the past couple of years, basically since I got back from the Camino, I did a couple of kind of like weekends away and stuff, but I haven't managed to do any big holidays or big hiking trips and that kind of thing. So I started looking at doing things closer to home, and that's actually how I started getting into trail running, the running on trails that are quite close by. And I managed to find so many little hidden trails around the kind of like edges of suburbia where I live. Doing that gave me the same kind of feeling of achievement that I would get from a whole day of hiking in an hour of running, essentially. So I can get much further out. When I was training to do Race to the Stones last year, so I decided to sign up and do this ultra marathon, first race I've ever done in my life, and I went for 100 kilometers over a weekend.
Wow.
I was having to find time to fit it in, like you say, and I did quite a lot of leaving work and going for a run straight after work, and I would be an hour out of work and I couldn't see where I'd started and that kind of thing, and be in the middle of a forest or woodland, even though I work in the centre of a town. So yeah, definitely just looking much closer to home, having a look at maps and seeing the routes that you might not see when you're from the road or something. And also I do an awful lot of taking a path, and if there's a fork in the road, I just go, do I go left or right, and that kind of thing. So yeah, I think there is a lot of adventure to be found close to home, and that is something which at the moment, obviously, we're all being forced to be close to home. It's really nice to see other people exploring that as well.
That's brilliant. Yeah, I mean, that's so much, I guess, chimes with my initial ideas around sort of what everyday adventures look like, and that that analogy of just that fork in that road and just going, well, I went that way yesterday, I'm going to go this way today. Let's see where it goes and what happens. And
it is incredible how much you find. I mean, the one time I did that and I just came across this massive field surrounded by houses, and I was just going, where did this come from? There's
I didn't
nothing
know
to say that this would be here.
Yes. Yeah, and actually, like you said, that actually you can get such a thrill from doing those things on your own doorstep, a similar thrill that you get by heading off into the distance. And, you know, not that big adventures aren't wonderful, but actually that if it's the feelings that you're after, of that excitement, that exploration, actually that can be found on your doorstep too. So given that, I suppose, what are the benefits that those sort of mini adventures or larger adventures bring and have brought to you, I guess, in the past? What keeps you going?
It's so much. I think part of it is just a sense of achievement. Like I said, it's, you know, we're all very busy doing our everyday lives and life admin, and you achieve things at work and that kind of stuff, but having that physical sense of achievement at the end of the day, I think that does definitely make me feel quite kind of like nice at the end of the day, essentially. And for me in particular, with the epilepsy, I think being able to reconnect to my body in a good way was so fundamental to me. And it's not something that I set out to do when I did the Camino. It's not something I set out to do when I chose to do a trail run, but certainly that's one of the things that I kind of got out of it. One of the things that I look back and I assess, where have I come from and where am I now? And feeling like my body can get me across countries and hundreds of miles in a weekend and that kind of thing. It is really nice to be able to know that, yes, it feels like it let me down at times, but it's also done a lot for me. And that is such a nice feeling.
Wow, that's such a wonderful way to look at it. Yeah, almost, well, I guess partly it's reframing what your body's capable of, but also, like you said, that it's not something you necessarily expected to happen, but that actually that your relationship with your body changes as a result of seeing what it can achieve rather than what it's restricted from doing.
And I would say, on a slight tangent, but in a similar vein, it really made me reassess seizures as well, because for my seizures, there's no specific trigger. We don't know what exactly caused them when they were happening. It could have been stress, it could have been anything. But in that, essentially, your body's trying to protect you in a way. Your body has got to a stage where you've stressed it out so much that it's giving you a seizure to essentially go, okay, stop, we can't do any more. And when you're doing things like long distance hiking, lots of running, any endurance challenge, your body kind of does similar things, and being able to learn to listen to your body and listen to when it maybe needs a bit of a break and that kind of thing. Certainly learning how to do that through something that you enjoy is definitely a nicer way than if you're putting so much stress on your body that you end up having health issues. So that kind of, yeah, definitely helped me understand to look after myself. It gave me an excuse to look after myself as well.
Yeah, and I guess that's so important as well, because so much, I guess, of the rhetoric out there as well is about particularly when you're doing sort of endurance events, this idea that you're pushing through something, or you've just, it's grit and determination and digging in, and, that you've just got to break through it. But actually, in a way, it's almost the opposite of going, okay, I need to listen to what my body's telling me, and that will enable it to do more.
Yeah, definitely.
I guess on that basis, I mean, I'm sure there'll be a lot of people, listening to this and thinking, either I would love to get out and try there, and I'm not sure if I'm capable of doing these things, or I don't even really know where to get started. And that may be people who either have epilepsy or who have other conditions, or maybe who just don't, have a condition at all in that sort of sense, but are thinking actually that there's still a lot of barriers that they're facing. I mean, what advice would you give?
Yeah, I think there's two things. I think that having a goal to go out there is half of the battle. One thing that I'm starting to realize when I talk to people about the two big things, doing the Camino and doing Race to the Stones last year, I didn't know that those existed until right before I decided to do them. Essentially, I did the Camino because I wanted to go and do a hike of some sort. And I typed in long hikes in Europe, and obviously the Camino comes up quite high on that Google search. So I looked at it and went, okay, I want to do that. And I then assessed where I was starting from. I assessed my fitness, what money I had available, what time I might have available, and then it was one step at a time from there. And that's what I always say to people, is to assess where you are starting from, and if you have a goal for where you want to be, then you can plot the route. And you're constantly going to be reassessing as well, because what you could do 2 years ago, you might not be able to do, or you might not have been able to do something 2 years ago, and now actually you're much fitter or you're much healthier. So yeah, constantly reassessing and assessing where you're starting from. And if you've got a goal, then you can get there if you kind of keep putting one foot in front of the other.
I love that you went on and just Googled, okay, where's a long walk? That's awesome. And but in a way, the goal is not necessarily, right, I'm going to do this event, but I want to do this thing. I want to try doing a long walk or an ultramarathon, and then finding something to fit, whether it's your timetable or your lifestyle or the place you want to go, and sort of working around that. Finding a way to make that happen then.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that a lot of people with health conditions, or a lot of people, even with any big life change. So if you're having kids and stuff like that, you learn how to adapt to it very quickly. And you can adapt to ventures in exactly the same way. I think if you are used to doing something one way, just think if there are any little tweaks that you can do to like either ramp it up a bit or make it a bit more chilled, depending on how you feel.
Yeah, that adaptability is so key. And like you said, starting from where you are right now rather than where you used to be, or you know, where you think you might be. Actually, where am I right now? What do I think I can do right now? And where would I like to get to? That's so brilliant. Thank you so much, Fran. If people want to find out more about, obviously we've talked about your podcast, but where can people find out more about you, learn more about your journey?
So I'm fairly findable, actually. So if you can spell my name, then just type me in, and there's quite a lot that comes up now. But yeah, if you go to Seize Your Adventure, there's quite a lot more information on there. So that's Seize YOUR Adventure. Or you can find me on Instagram is probably the best place, and that's at Frantic Tea Walks. So you can find me there as well.
Fantastic. And yeah, definitely check out the podcast because it is amazing. And I've learned so much from listening to it. So thanks so much, Fran, again. It's been an absolute pleasure having you, and I hope to speak to you again soon.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you for having me.
So I hope you enjoyed that episode with Fran. And if, like me, you had relatively little knowledge or experience around epilepsy prior to it, I hope that you've learned something from it too. What I found particularly interesting was her discussion around her body and how taking up adventure activities, going for hikes, going trail running, had actually allowed her relationship with her body to change. And instead of seeing what it couldn't do or what she was being limited by, actually what it was able to do. But also taking that one stage further, this idea that actually her body is there protecting her, that in a way it enabled her to dial in and be more in tune with what her body was trying to say. And I think for so many of us, we often push past, whether it's in taking part in adventure sports or activities, or being outdoors, or whether actually it's in our normal day-to-day lives. You know, we can feel the headache starting to come on, we feel stressed, we're tired, but we push through it. And often it's our bodies, you know, sometimes, you know, I know for me, I'll get a cold, and body's way of just saying, stop, enough, you can't do anymore. So maybe there's a lesson there, and certainly something that I'm going to take away is just again about thinking about when your body is trying to send you that information, when it is trying to tell you that maybe you're pushing past your limits, that it's a time to pause and reflect and save your energy, and actually that allows you to go further in the end. So as always, if you have any thoughts or comments, ideas, I'd love to hear from you. Please feel free to get in touch with me. I'm on Instagram at Resilience at Work. You can join our Facebook group, the Everyday Adventure Club. And otherwise, I look forward to seeing you next week for another adventure. Speak to you soon. Bye.